Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Icarus, and am I in a different room today? Yes, I am. Why am I in a different room today? Partially because of laziness, partially because my tablet is dying. Also, my pets can get to me more easily right here. At least these two idiots. I had thought I was going to make a video about positive masculine role models in media, specifically animated media, because I can't stop thinking about Beef from the Great North, Bob's from Bob Burgers, Reagan Arataka from Mob Psycho 100, people like that. But my brain is dead. Tumblr's blown up completely because someone decided to make a Transandrophobia truther block list, and my URL was on it, so now I have like double the amount of followers on Tumblr than I did literally this time yesterday. And I also wanted to make sure that I got to this other video by the person that I critiqued the other day. I'm very curious about it. I have literally forced myself not to watch it ahead of time, so this is a completely blind reaction. This video is called Complications of Transmasculine Vocabulary, and then Mismoliberty. I don't know what that word is. Maybe we'll find out in the video. So without further ado, let's get started.
Hello. Believe it or not, this actually wasn't what I planned on making next. I was going to make a top surgery video about specific things I feel like aren't talked about, like planning top surgery, how to decide to get it, hospital stay, recovery, consultation stuff. So if you have specific questions you haven't gotten answered, please leave them down below. But this video I made in reaction to some discourses happening per usual, and I felt like it was important to talk about.
Oh, a couple of things to note just right off the bat. We are again going with like the orange aesthetic, though I appreciate that this video seems to be less scripted. And also, right now, I appreciate that there's more than just orange as a color. Very curious why the Clockwork Orange is a poster behind them, but also congratulations on the top surgery. That was completely unnecessary. Let's keep going.
If you haven't seen my last video on transmasculine reactions to transmisogyny, this might be a good primer for this one, or follow-up for the one that you're watching right now.
We did watch that one. Does this bode well? I don't know.
So, the more transmisogyny videos you can watch, the better. So I do recommend pausing, link below, watch that one, then watch this one. But here we are. Content warning. Mentions of transmisogyny, transphobia, violence, misogyny, body shaming, misgendering, biological essentialism, community infighting, enbiphobia, trauma, and identity policing. So, to relevant discourses in trans spaces, here I am once again. Today's chef's special is the flavor of transmasculine specific discrimination. Is there a word for it?
There is. Transandrophobia. This will probably get brought up later, but there is. Also, this is Dory. Hi, Dory. If you hear her yelling in the background, I apologize. She's in a mood. Aren't you? Actually, come say hi to the camera. No, come on. She's not super pleased. Dory. No, you're not happy with me at all, are you? Alright, I'll put you down. She's not always like that. She doesn't mind being picked up all the time. Just that time, apparently. I know.
In itself, it's an important pursuit, absolutely. But it often gets itself muddied by comparing, debating, discrediting, or even stealing from concepts around transmisogyny.
How can you steal a concept from transmisogyny? Okay, hi Nettle. As my stress triggers, I guess Nettle's gonna come look at me. Alright, how can you steal concepts from transmisogyny? What? Will you explain this?
This in itself is blatant transmisogyny to make a word up as a trump card against transmisogynistic accusations. Rightfully so, this often shuts down the conversation out of respect for protecting the language and the people affected by transmisogyny. But it leaves the question stagnant and controversy-ridden. What is there to know, define, and avoid? What has this pursuit been doing wrong, and is it able to be saved? That's what I plan on doing today, retracing the steps and seeing if there's something to be found and defined, or if we should abandon the concept of having a term to define transmasculine experiences entirely.
Why would we abandon it? First off, we have a word, transandrophobia. It is perfectly acceptable because it takes a step away from the idea of misandry, which many people protested because misandry isn't a real thing, that sort of deal. So it takes a step back from that assumption and is still talking about the specifics of being transgender and being seen as a man. But why would we refuse to come up with a term anyway? If you refuse to use transandrophobia, why would you want to abandon it altogether? You have words for other things. I mean, I don't think there's a specific word for male homosexuals who experience phobia. I mean, we do use homophobia, but homophobia can also be used as a greater term that it gets used as a blanket term, just like the LGBT flag gets used as a sort of blanket flag for the entire queer community. There's actually this interesting phenomenon when you think about it, especially in queer feminist spaces where men aren't allowed to talk about the problems that they have. And this includes not having language specific to these problems. They end up being put into the blanket term, which kind of helps dismiss specific problems they're having. Like, I don't think there's a specific word to talk about gay male experienced homophobia, which may not seem like a big deal until you remember that there's disabled, mentally ill, men of color, men coming from other cultures, where having a specific term might be useful. But we don't have that. God, and we thought the lesbian flag was a big issue.
First, I wanted to start my pursuit by acknowledging what it is that transmasculine people experience and seeing if those experiences have ways to be encompassed that already exist. And I was able to narrow it down to 4 categories. One is transphobia, misgendering, gender identity being doubted, lack of access to heavily gendered resources like medical care and facilities, violence, lack of representation, non-intersectional feminism advocacy. 2 is misogyny, assuming we are women and mistreating us accordingly, having any masculinity be seen as a failure or damage to your body, equating sex organs and bodily functions to your value, and having your manhood or lack of womanhood be seen as a betrayal, that being biological essentialism, that being born with a certain anatomy forcefully makes you a gender.
I have thoughts, but they're kind of percolating, like coffee, except I don't like coffee, so I guess they're not good thoughts. I find it a little confusing that, yes, trans masculine and trans men people experience these things, but there is like a specific intersection that you are actually discussing that falls under transandrophobia, because trans women and non-binary and intersex people who do identify under the trans umbrella can experience transphobia themselves, but they're very specific types relating to their own gender experience and identity, as well as the misogyny. Like, people make such a big deal about trans misogyny affecting trans femme people. So to the point where I'm not allowed to say that I have had trans misogyny put again or levied against me. The long pauses are me trying to come up with words. I'm not the best at blind reacting, especially when I'm being filmed, but I'm trying. If I seem irritated or stressed, it's more just I'm not able to come up with the words quickly enough to seem intelligent. Let's see where they're going with this. I'll let them finish.
3 is toxic masculinity, coping with transphobia or sometimes even dysphoria and enacting male supremacist behaviors, as well as having your masculinity in relationship to manhood deeply scrutinized for any flaws, like any sign of perceived femininity. 4 is biological essentialism. Again, when trans masks are excluded from feminist conversations like reproductive rights and misogyny, it's branching off the idea that physical characteristics like penis, testosterone, flat chest, short hair.
I really want a banana now. Sorry, that's not relevant at all. I just want a banana now.
Whatever equals man, and man equals violence. Alternatively, when transmasculine people are characterized as soft or safer than cis men, that also equates characteristics to gender to a moral, forcibly assigning meaning to something that isn't inherently there. Now, these experiences all absolutely have terms, but is there a way to further narrow things down and encompass them all cleanly under one word or term?
Yes, transandrophobia.
There's been attempts in the past and present, but all of them seem to fall through, missing something or another. Transmisandry. Well, this will be easy. It incorrectly implies that misandry exists, misandry being the reactionary term coined to undercut people pointing out misogyny, combat feminism, and enforce a male-centric culture. So, nope.
Hey, I guessed that was going to come up. I admit I'm not really a fan of the term transmisandry or misandry, meaning I'm also not a fan of the word transmisandry, but I do think there is a place to talk about men's issues, and the fact that feminism today has been so poisoned by radfem ideology, the fact that there's not a place to discuss men's issues, and there's not really any real effort to help men in general feminist circles is very concerning. And I'm coming at this from the position of a feminist who has talked to men who are upset about how feminism has treated them, and they've asked me for sources, and I've gone. And I know Google searches like alter how you see things based on your previous history. So I'm saying I am a feminist, and I have been interested in feminism for a very long time. So why are my searches not coming up with feminist movements helping men? So even though I think misandry is a loaded term and really shouldn't be used, we are once again falling into that pitfall of men don't have specific terminology to talk about their issues, and that includes cis men. Like, I get it. Patriarchy sucks, but we're all affected by it, and the actual people that benefit from it are so small. It's a very select, small group of already wealthy, typically Western, white people, at least in the US-centric world. In India or anywhere else where the culture is very different from what I'm familiar with, the way patriarchy is used can be very different in who benefits the most. But there are always going to be a majority of men who do not fit into the narrative of the men who are in control. And it just seems weird that we're not allowed to give men words to talk about their experiences. And I wonder if that's in part why we have the MRAs and the red pill, not necessarily the incels. I mean, they did co-opt that term from a woman, and they are extremely bitter, but would that bitterness be the same if we had kept circles open for men to be able to discuss their issues from the start? Whereas, today, if a man tries to speak up, they get shouted over, and there's no space for them. I realize I'm beating a dead horse because I talk about this anytime I talk about men's issues, but I knew transmisandry was going to come up, so giving myself a little clap on the back for that.
Transandrophobia. Well, androphobia is the same as misandry, just from a place of fear. Easy no again.
The fact that they don't even want to dig into the term very much is annoying. Transandrophobia is the best term that we have so far, as it avoids the misandry thing. As far as I know, androphobia is not very well used in MRA or men's rights general circles. I am dividing MRA as the toxic part as well, from maybe feminist men who try to focus on men's rights, which I consider myself to be, though the more and more I realize how much rad feminism has infiltrated into everyone's day-to-day life, the less and less I want to consider myself a feminist. Which is pretty sad, because that's been a massive part of my identity since I left the church, so... What other terms will we get to hear?
Plus, these last two don't encompass non-binary trans people as well, who can also experience transmasculine discrimination.
First off, there is a term specific for non-binary people, NBphobia. But also, transandrophobia is currently defined as the specific type of transphobia that trans men and transmasculine people face. So, even though the root word does not seem like it fits into non-binary people, the way that it is used does. There's such a thing as connotation and denotation. You are looking at this from denotation, the actual, literal translation of it. People don't use language like that. And that's actually one of those things that is very hard for people who are neuroatypical and may take things more literally to understand, such as myself. I did not understand sarcasm for most of my life growing up. I still struggle with that, actually. So, I'll let them continue.
Misplaced misogyny. Okay, we're acknowledging misogyny here, but it leaves out the other factors, only slightly acknowledging transphobia, possibly making it fall flat.
I don't really like the term either, because I agree it sounds like reverse racism. Hot take, but reverse racism isn't a very good phrase. Racism is a thing, and the fact that people have tried to change racism to mean like it's only for people who have been oppressed in the past or are currently, it doesn't sit right with me. It did once upon a time, but then I kind of grew up and matured, thought about it, and realized that was a bunch of bullshit. We are able to create more specific language for specific things, like oppressive racism. So why do we need to, come up with a completely new term? Not great of a term.
Virilmisia. This term caught my eye, virility being masculine traits viewed in a positive light. So this term was made to define the disdain transmasculine people face for being masculine or masculinizing themselves. The defining document acknowledges the nuances of transmasculine experiences and acknowledges how virility can make transmasculine people useful in the eyes of cisgender folks. I think it ticks more of these boxes than our last few options, but it falls short on how misogyny plays a part, and like the first two, is very insistent on the focus of masculinity or manhood.
I saw a thing that was about this term in particular. I'm going to see if I can't find it. If it takes me a minute, I'll just cut. Alright, I found it. So this is something that I saw yesterday that got reblogged from a Tumblr called Transandrophobia-Teacher. I'll leave a link into it in the description. And it says, "We need to talk about a problem, friends. The issue is that as the trans men discourse evolves on Twitter, increasing numbers of people of all genders and no gender are promoting a triggering, transmedicalist, transphobic, racist, and ableist definition of transandrophobia. Virulmisia. Content note: transandrophobia, racism, and ableism. Sorry, I don't know. When I see CN, I think Cartoon Network. So, the Virulmisia essay is an ill-conceived critique of masculinity as a social construct in the global north / colonial European history and culture. It spends more time listing traits perceived as masculine than it does offering a coherent and substantial definition of transandrophobia. Its potential value and redeeming qualities are so bereft as to render the term useless at best and harmful at worst. That said, here are some specific critiques of virulmisia to consider before you ask another person. Have you read the article on virulmisia? Its origin is a Western medical term that describes women who develop male pattern hair growth / other masculine physical traits. And then there's a screenshot that says, what is virilization? It is a condition in which women develop male pattern hair growth and other masculine physical traits. Oftentimes they have an imbalance of their sex chromosomes, including male sex hormones such as testosterone. They're also called androgens. Overproduction of androgens can cause virilization. That's a very WebMD explanation with a duplicity. Use of the word virile invokes the transandrophobia, transmisogyny, and misogyny inherent in its institutional origin and validates the cis-sexism, heterosexism, transphobia, transmedicalism, anti-blackness / racism, and ableism underpinning it. And then there's a link to a source. And it's like, while virility may refer to innate masculine personality traits, virilization refers to the physical process of becoming more masculine. Why employ a harmful and triggering term for trans masks in naming discrimination against us? Why ground a word meant to specifically refer to the unique discrimination faced by trans men and mask in a term that doesn't see trans men as men, but considers us men / masks only after we fulfill antiquated and cis-sexist requirements of being men? That's a really hard word for me to say. Cis-sexist. E.g., increased body hair. And why choose a term that reduces transness to an imbalance of sex hormones? That is transmedicalism, unless the term intends to misgender, pathologize, and or invalidate us by denying our masculinity, implying we are not men. Virulmisia means hate for virility, whether virility is invoked to describe a cis man or an individual with innate masculine personality traits. I'm just kind of scanning now because I'm realizing I'm reading the entire thing and it's a little long. Putting aside the inherent transphobia, still not convinced that possessing natural physical size and strength, assertiveness, and power is feared in all women. Fails to center those most impacted by it, Black and Indigenous trans men and trans men of color. Fails to center any trans men, in fact. It centers people who feature innate masculine personality traits. The author's conflation of virility with strength, manliness, sturdy with a high sex drive, may also have something to do with it. Why? Are you trying to alienate our ace trans brothers? That's so bad. I haven't even read this essay, and I'm already upset by that. Yet another strike against invoking virility to identify anti-trans mass discrimination. It requires acceptance of an ableist, Eurocentric, imperialist, and patriarchal view of what a man is. That is definitely a problem. We've discussed the issues of how patriarchy treats men. Black trans man and mask, a white person has solved the problem with identifying the specific discrimination you deal with under white supremacy. It's just your natural masculine behavior. Jesus Christ, that is... The word white appears in the essay once. The word black never appears. Interesting. Its critique is limited to identifying that trans men and trans masks are often viewed by a cis-sexist, heterosexist, and a patriarchal white supremacist society as a representative of wasted fertility. Why reduce the complex, intersecting, and always changing dynamic of transandrophobia to fertility? That is a good point. Some of the specific issues that trans men and trans masked people can face is stuff like, if we are stealth, if we have managed to pass, say, at work or something, and we're hanging out with a bunch of cis men, they may expect us to participate in misogynistic jokes. That is actually a very common complaint that I've heard on our FTM for people that have managed to pass and start working at a new place. And they don't know if they should just go along with it for fear of outing themselves or try and call them out. And a lot of people do try to call them out and then they get questioned about it. That has nothing to do with your ability to make a baby, but it has everything to do with how people treat men and how men expect each other to treat each other because that's what they grew up in. All right, next point. It's bioessentialist and anti-black slash racist, transmedicalist, ableist, homophobic, and transphobic. Consider the behavior of cis men when they are faced with the idea that someone who was assigned female at birth may be physically stronger than them, or really any theoretical cis man. They become not only defensive but aggressively offended by the very possibility. That's very essentialist of men. Even puts on an Attenborough tone. Buying into the above logic involves Dory. No. She is trying to climb. No. Unhook yourself. Alright, we're back from that cat mishap. Sorry. So anyway, the person that is talking about this is like saying exactly what I'm saying. Cis men aren't a monolith, and this ignores the way that men can hold power. These claims are necessary to establish for the following assertions, however. In this way, trans men face a more intense pressure than even cis men to be men, to prove that they can be strong as any cis man while distancing themselves from womanhood. More than cis men, any perceived connection to womanhood or femininity or weakness can be used to say trans men are not really men. This can lead some trans men into adopting behaviors of toxic masculinity. Yes, that is true. But with everything else, with the viromycia term, it seems to really be not good. And I'll read what they say. The last point is really meant to summarize our analysis of the viromycia essay overall. We recognize that it sufficiently identified one facet of transandrophobia, perceived loss of fertility, but when critical race, gender, and disability lenses are applied, the discussion and analysis is inadequate. This essay is devoid of content or coherent analysis and is riddled with typos so egregious they're Freudian. Alright, here's a paragraph which the author says trans men only suffer physical violence and abuse when we emulate cis men's normal behavior, which is helpfully defined by the author earlier in the paragraph as being assertive, dominant, and having a high sex drive. Considering some of the ways that trans men are devalued and exploited due to virility, sex drive is something that comes to mind. It is something that is not discussed enough, and that is the way that being assertive, dominant, and having a high sex drive as a trans man is viewed negatively. But more than that, it's exploitable. Many trans men are the victims of sexual assault at some point in their lives. Oftentimes, the behavior of victims is used to excuse violence. In this way, trans men may suffer physical violence and abuse if they behave sexually in ways that would be normal for cis men. That disturbs me, because once again, we're putting men into this monolith, specifically trans men and trans masculine people. Not all trans men have a high sex drive. And I think this goes back to a fundamental misunderstanding of how HRT affects your libido. And I've read it in a couple different ways, and the way that I like to mention to people is that it doesn't affect how much you do or don't want sex. It affects how quickly you can get started. And to just lay all my cards on the table, so I've mentioned many times that I am ace, I have a libido now, but I have not talked about what happened before I started hormones. About a year before I started getting curious and sexually experimenting with myself. I was like, maybe I will find it interesting. I have no real interest in it, but maybe I'll find it something to do. Maybe I'll learn what an orgasm is. Maybe I won't be so fucking scared of it anymore, and then I can try my own products and do fine. I used to make dildos. So I started experimenting, and I found myself a little bit addicted to it. It would be very easy to get me bored and turn it off and go off and do my own thing. But with the inclusion of things like vibrators, I discovered that, and this is before I started taking testosterone, I could eventually become aroused. I never grew comfortable with any sort of penetration or anything like that, but that slow arousal after I took testosterone kind of changed to where I could get aroused very quickly, but I would still get bored very quickly. So all that happened is it took a dimmer switch and turned it into a regular light switch. And I am reading what I've read from other people, reading different reports. I wish I had bookmarked some of these reports so that I could link them, and if I find them, I will make another video and link those explicitly. But it seems like that is more of how it happens, that depending on how much estrogen or how much testosterone is in your body will affect how your switch is, if it's a dimmer switch or if it's a regular old flick on, flick off, or somewhere in between. So it's not really a gain of libido, it's not really a gain of sex drive, it's just a different way relationship with it. And I feel like that's important for ace people to hear too, because there's a lot of young ace trans men who are scared of starting testosterone because they're scared of gaining the libido. Anyway, so yeah, I'm glad that I just came across that post yesterday from one of my mutuals and I saved it to read later because I was like, that seems like a weird term. I'm going to look into that when I'm more awake. And then I watched this video and it came in handy. So we'll go back to the video. It's kind of telling, to me at least, how the term that they like the most so far, I happen to have very good documentation on why it's such a piece of shit. And the term that I like the most so far, transandrophobia, they dismissed without any justification besides, oh, it's too close to transmisandry.
Trans people assigned female, a recent addition. This was created in direct response to disliking TME/TMA language, so a bad start. This term was made to talk about how assigned gender at birth, AGAB, is an ongoing act past birth, which I don't think the initial term ever didn't imply, to show how active femaling is an act of violence. It acknowledges transphobia and some of biological essentialism, but also contributes to biological essentialism and misogyny by implying that someone's sex is inherently detrimental or contradictory to gender, or some bodies inherently have worse experiences. This is also scarily reminiscent to anti-trans language like trans-identified male or female.
Okay, I think they finished with this one. I do agree it's a shit term for many of the same reasons. However, I also think TME, TMA is also shit terminology because the way that it gets used takes it away from a very specific context in which it would be useful. And I've discussed this before, but most specifically, I'll give you one example and then I'll move on, I promise. A cis woman could be TMA, trans misogyny affected. If, say, they go into the bathroom and someone sees them and thinks that they are a trans woman, so they go and harass/assault them. There have been news stories about this happening. In that moment, this person who may usually be TME is now TMA because the reason that she was assaulted is because she was being seen as a trans woman. Therefore, she was subjected to trans misogyny. However, I have a feeling that this person and other people who like to use TMA terminology to basically mean trans woman, everyone else, would heartily disagree with that and say that talking about it like that decenters trans women, which just makes them be the meme of I am upset when it's not about me. From the bird, I'll put that up there because I don't remember the exact phrase. Anyway, I'm saying anyway a lot. I'm sorry. It's a crutch term. So let's keep going.
So, none of these really fit the bill for catching all of the experiences into one well-put term.
Transandrophobia does.
If you noticed, all of them do share one strong aspect in common. They are all formed focusing on someone's masculinity and manhood. Either its current relevance versus an experience, see misdirected misogyny and TPAF, or how it's the reason someone is being mistreated. I feel like this being the focus is the inherent flaw with creating these words.
Why is it the inherent flaw? We have a term specifically for trans femme and trans women issues, trans misogyny. We have a term for non-binary people, NB-phobia. So why can we not have a term that focuses on trans men and trans masculine people? That inherently means it's going to focus on masculinity.
Not only does it come from a perspective of wanting to make an equivalent to trans misogyny,
it isn't equivalent. There's nothing wrong with that.
But many ignore toxic masculinity when talking about its detriment and try to frame their masculinity as the core problem, which I don't believe is the case.
Transandrophobia is specifically how people treat trans masc people because of their maleness. That is the core of the problem, that they are trans and that they are male. This includes intersections with toxic masculinity and how toxic masculinity can affect people who are trans masculine. You're so weird, Dory. Okay, I'm calm. We'll keep going.
Whipping Girl by Julie Serrano does a fantastic job of pointing out the critical flaw with trans mascs, assuming they're hated exclusively for their masculinity and manhood. While trans people on the female to male spectrum face discrimination for breaking gender norms, i.e. oppositional sexism, their expressions of maleness or masculinity themselves are not targeted for ridicule. To do so would require one to question masculinity itself. Our society is androcentric, putting masculinity at the center to marginalize femininity. Because of that, society can interpret transitioning to a masculine role affirms that masculinity is superior. We are victims trying to escape.
Okay, this is actually a quote that they brought up before. But I'll see if I can't pull up the quote for this because I literally saw it yesterday because of the whole transandrophobia ban list getting blown up. There is another quote from Serrano that talks about how there is inadequate language around the unique problems that trans masculine people face. Other than that, if you want to hear my thoughts on this quote in particular and the way that they're choosing to interpret it, go look at the other video. I'll include it in the card or in the down below, whatever. YouTube. It is a very long video, but I feel like this one, it's a very good primer for why I'm reacting to their statements the way that I am.
They don't respect that anyways, but because we don't threaten that supremacy, we get a slight pass, a crumb of privilege.
I take many issues in the idea that trans men get even a crumb of privilege because everything about that falls apart the moment that you put the word trans in front of man. Sure, a person may be perfectly fine going stealth. They may get male privilege from pretending that they were born cis. That can encompass many, many things. But then you also have to remember, maybe this person who is stealth is black. Maybe they are disabled. Maybe they are mentally ill. Maybe they get raped and they have to go get medical care to prevent an unwanted birth, but then they get denied access because they are seen as cis men. That's not a privilege. That is an act of detriment. The fact that they have to out themselves to do so. The fact that there are many places where they would not be able to access an abortion legally, and because testosterone can be harmful to a growing fetus, they can be taken off of testosterone. Trans men can be coercively raped and forced to detransition. That is terrifying. Give me a condition where a trans woman can be forced to detransition because medically it ends up being worse for her, where it's being coerced. It's not like an inherent problem, like they have a specific sickness or something. Give me something that is of that level for trans women, and I will say that transandrophobia is not equal to trans misogyny. And even then, that's a big if.
When privilege is said, it's within a context. I'm going to say that one again. The privilege is contextual. We certainly don't have any cis privilege, giving us plenty of societal discrimination. But in comparison to trans feminine people, our transitions are considered less dangerous.
Tell that to anyone who tries to get phalloplasty. How is phalloplasty less dangerous? Also tell that to anyone who tries to get a hysterectomy or who wants to get a mastectomy without necessarily going through the hormones or getting the letters, that sort of thing, just regular old mastectomy. Yes, these things are rooted in trans misogyny, but because they are medical procedures that are being used as gender affirmation in the specific context with trans men and trans masculine people, including non-binary people who may not want to go on testosterone, these are transandrophobic events. I really resent the idea that trans men are less oppressed, because that is simply not true. We are equally oppressed, and this is simply just lateral aggression towards trans men. Dory, please move. Oh my gosh. She wants to be the star of my YouTube channel, and honestly, I would let her if she would cooperate in any way, but she does not.
Anti-trans folks see trans feminine people as an attack or threat on womanhood and become incredibly hostile because of it. Whereas, there's not a similar reaction towards trans masculine people and manhood. In fact, common fear-mongering tactics claim trans femmes are the ones manipulating trans masks to transition.
Okay. That deep breath was me just centering myself because I've gone over this many a time. Trans femme and trans women people are seen as a threat by right-wing TERFs, conservatives, etc., because they are an easy target. For them, because they are seen by the right as men in dresses, it is a mockery. It is something to laugh at. Look at these men, so deluded that they are putting on makeup and dresses and curling their hair, and they think that they can be women. Ha ha, let's laugh at the clown. On the other hand, they can also be seen simultaneously as a threat. Look at these men putting on dresses and makeup and sneaking into women's only spaces to hurt us. That is why trans women end up getting the brunt of hatred and focus and mockery. It's also why there's so much more attention played to trans women, especially very feminine trans women in media, in positive media even. You don't see very many butch trans women out there because, to be honest, I am fairly certain the people that are trying to portray trans women in a positive light are worried that they will invalidate trans women by showing them being masculine. On the other hand, trans men, it is harder to see trans men as a threat because the right sees us as women, and it's less about us escaping our privilege or being coerced by trans women, because I'm sorry, but I don't see that in media news. I don't see that on Fox News. I see that by individual TERFs, but I don't see it in J.K. Rowling shit. So I don't think that's as widespread a phenomena as people think it is. But because we are seen as women, we are inherently weaker and less threatening. When we go into male spaces, because we're seen as women, we're actually seen as more potential victims. We are more likely to be assaulted that way. Not saying trans women don't experience assault in women's spaces, they absolutely do. But we're once again playing into this idea of the women must be protected from the evil trans women, while trans men, we're not a danger. So it's very like in lesbian history where homosexual men were seen as perverted, actively like seducing or corrupting their fellow man, while lesbians were just not documented. And that is a horror in its own right. But that doesn't mean that we aren't experiencing the same amount of oppression. It's just different types, and that's why transandrophobia is such an important term, despite the fact that you decided to dismiss it out of hand because it's too similar to transmisandry.
We didn't choose this, but we must acknowledge it in order to change it. That's the very ugly truth about this pursuit here. It's not as simple as we are victims. We certainly are in many ways in a cisnormative world, but we also have some complicated privilege that we didn't necessarily ask for.
So do trans women. I mean, hell, look at ContraPoints. She's a wealthy white woman who, because of her wealth, was able to transition fairly easily, and now she passes and she's fucking gorgeous. But because of her privilege and her status, she is able to give some really bad takes about like asexual or non-binary people, and even though she gets called out about it, all she does is just kind of like ignore, delete Twitter, and keep going. I would consider that a privilege that this person didn't give Evan from the last video. That poor dude who has like 900 followers and didn't even really do anything. But you know, women are never ever able to be privileged over men. So obviously, according to this person, men are always the oppressor, even when they're trans, even when they're disabled, even when there's other multiple intersections of privilege that can make them less privileged than other trans people. Once again, this video is just lacking a lot of nuance and not really wanting to talk about it because this person is convinced that trans men are less oppressed than trans women, instead of realizing we are equally oppressed in different ways.
But despite this, are we still possibly missing some kind of hidden intersection that trans masculine people experience? It seems like we're getting a lot closer to something now, even as the path gets rockier. Ironically, I noticed something crucial through researching the words I said didn't work. Throughout all of this, I gradually felt it coming until the realization crescendoed in my mind. There's a repeated theme of trauma with femininity, going back to our 4 experiences. 1. Transphobia, being treated and acknowledged as a woman as a form of violence. 2. Misogyny, having your value reduced to how well you can be a woman, and being a woman is bad by society's standards. 3. Toxic masculinity, fear of having signs of femininity contradict, disvalue, or disprove your masculinity or manhood. And 4. Biological essentialism, feeling that you cannot escape your birth-assigned sex, body, or role as female, having the nuances of your experiences erased. I feel like this forms a very unique experience, not always limited to trans men, trans masculine people, non-binary people, or even just trans people as a whole. When I pushed myself to make a potential word to cover this experience, I made Miss Muliebrity.
So that's where it is. Miss Muliebrity. Okay. The problem I'm having even before they even start with this is, first off, it's very fucking hard to pronounce and spell. So I feel like that's going to make it a little more inaccessible. Secondly, We're trying to come up with a term that is specifically for trans men and trans masculine people. If you want to come up with a term about the trauma of womanhood for anyone who may have traumatic experiences with womanhood, sure, fine. But that doesn't negate the need for these specific instances of transandrophobia that, yes, can even affect trans women and trans femme people if, say, they get seen as a trans man. So I'm already disliking this definition from the start because we are trying to come up with a term specifically for trans masculine experiences, and you are turning it into something that affects any trauma with womanhood whatsoever. That's a problem. We're once again hitting the men aren't allowed to have specific words for themselves to explain their own trauma. Well, let's let them define the term. Let me see if I'm actually wrong, because once again, I'm reading into this blind.
Mis meaning wrong or bad, muliebrity meaning womanly qualities, womanhood. This word is merely me spitballing a suggestion. Keep it, build on it, throw it away, but do consider a definition with me. Miss Muliebrity could define the relationship people have being victims of misogyny and had womanhood or femininity used as a tool of violence against them, forming a trauma towards assumed or forced femininity in womanhood. Between that trauma and an androcentric society's teachings, one learns to fear and resent femininity and womanhood, allowing toxic behaviors to arise. I've seen trans medicalists claiming you must be a masculine man to be truly trans. People scared to reclaim and explore feminine expression with a non-feminine gender. Trans people becoming anti-feminist and misogynistic. And I feel like this could be examples.
Okay. While they were talking, I got a little bit distracted because I had a feeling. And I was right. I looked it up in Merriam-Webster, and muliebrity is literally the opposite of virility. So when we're talking about this, we're basically using a similar word that we've already dissected why there's so many problems with using virality. So now this term falls apart for talking about transandrophobic events, not only because you are ignoring the very specific need of having language for trans men and trans masculine people expressing their trauma by encompassing it for everyone who's had trauma from womanhood, but you're also using this very problematic term that is just the opposite of virality. And you didn't like the viralism one, so yeah, no, this I'm throwing out, going to throw it out, throwing the baby out with the bathwater here.
But that's what I've been able to come up with. I'm only one person, so I put this in the hands of the community. Did I find something? Did I miss something? Is this conversation productive? And if it is, can we continue it in mindful ways that don't overshadow or attack others?
I don't know, considering the fact that you've basically been attacking trans men and trans masculine people this entire time by assuming that our oppression is less than trans women. But really, it's up to you.
That's the biggest takeaway. How can we help our community in ways that can coexist with other advocacy within happening at the same time? In itself, there's nothing wrong with acknowledging what experiences trans masculine people face and asking the objective question of if it can be compiled into a term that defines a unique experience.
Transandrophobia. Not your term because it doesn't specify towards trans men and trans masculine people.
Where things go south is when people rob others of their own language and use that power to silence those we disagree with. Our experiences don't have to be a perfect mirror or equivalent to trans misogyny, and to frame it that way fails the mission out the gate, just reinforcing oppositional sexism of the sex binary.
But it is, because we're talking about lateral oppression. This isn't the oppression Olympics. Dory has been evicted once again. Hopefully we can make it through the end without another mishap. Anyway, so not only is trans misogyny and transandrophobia just describing equal but different types of experiences. But a lot of the pushback I've seen from transandrophobia comes because trans women are disliking the fact that we're talking about the issues, and are disliking the fact that we are talking about transandrophobia within the trans community, which does mean that we're calling out trans women for their bullshit, and trans men, because there's still plenty of trans men who think that our oppression is less than. Again, I was one of those people when I started this YouTube channel in October. I had a very radical change of mind because I got so pissed off that I kept seeing trans women entering mask spaces to woobify us, or the whole Reddit fallout where it came out that there were trans women on the trans meme subreddit literally going into people's DMs and fetishizing their bodies. That was my final straw. Trans women are just as capable of transandrophobia as trans men are of transmisogyny. Trans women experience transandrophobia in times, as well as trans men experiencing transmisogyny. These are equal terms. They are equivalent. This isn't oppositional. This is describing certain experiences that lay over the binaries. And endophobia, I don't have as much knowledge about the discourse around that, but it's meant to encompass like the non-binary or agender experiences. And I'm sure we do need more specific terminology for agender phobia. But I'm not the one to come up with that. I didn't come up with transandrophobia. I just think it's a very useful term because it steps away from the gut feeling of transmisandry, and it doesn't have the baggage that these other terms have. Thank you, Dory.
We can have these conversations without denying transmasculine hardships or causing needless harm to trans feminine folks.
But you are devaluing transmasculine experiences.
But that's all I have to say. I wanted to do a quick cleanup and reframing of this discourse because it's getting very, very, very out of hand. Hopefully this got some gears turning out there on the topic and offered a better direction for the conversation to continue. Anyways, thank you for listening.
Okay, final thoughts. My gears are turning, but it's mostly in the idea of how stupid this idea was, how you basically coined a term that doesn't talk about trans mask experiences specifically, but instead trauma of womanhood generally. And it still has the same problems that the virality adjacent one has, with the whole reducing people down to their parts. I don't think that this is going to go the way that they want, and unfortunately I find myself very disappointed with how they have chosen to interpret transandrophobia and other actually useful terms. I do think it's a problem that they keep approaching this discussion from the mindset of trans masc people having privilege over trans femme people, because that's not true. It's not a universal truth. And you can't start coining terms talking about lived experiences by many, assuming that certain things are universal truths. We have to be intersectional. We have to think about how does this affect Black people? How does this affect people from other cultures? How does this affect people with physical or mental disabilities? How does this affect white people? How does this affect our trans femme sisters? Because, yeah, that's another important thing. We have to understand that this term can also be sparingly used to describe experiences where they have been misgendered and treated like they're trans men because they say they're trans. As much as I talk about how I'll say, hey, I'm trans, or I'm a trans man, and people are like, oh, so you were born a man and now you're transitioning to a woman. You look great, or you look like shit. That's times of trans misogyny. And yeah, no. But let me end this on a positive note. I do think this video was mostly better in terms of how it was produced. I'm very glad not to see tweets poorly pasted into books. I am also I really like the little paper cutouts of the terms. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the paper doll cutting and crumpling, because that's very similar to how I feel about womanhood currently. Um, I did like not having just a grainy orange filter everything, and I liked that most of this didn't seem to be overwritten. Like, I could tell in places that this was from a script, and they were being very precise with their language. It was just in a not great way. Um, but generally, it felt a lot more authentic and off the cuff. But no, at the end of the day, their conclusion is kind of bullshit, because they are coming from a bad premise. And I don't know how to put it better than that. So, without further ado, if you like what I've talked about, if you like the way that I dissect things, please keep following me. I don't have a specific day for when I talk about transmasc issues, but I do have specific days where I talk about sex ed stuff. That's on Fridays. Anti-religion stuff. That's on Sundays. And pretty much the rest of the time I talk about whatever the fuck I want. So feel free to subscribe. You'll see a variety of things, from me talking about houses and buying a house and eventually renovating a house, to my art, to stressing out about capitalism, to stuff like this. And I really appreciate everyone on Tumblr who has started to following me because of that block list. I hope to get into more discussions about transandrophobia that don't center around how bad faith trans femme people are taking it. And yeah, that's going to be it for me. Y'all stay hydrated. I'm going to get a drink because I still don't have prior. I still haven't found my glasses. I'm a simp for them because they make my world go round. But yeah, y'all stay hydrated, stay safe, and keep a critical mind, I guess, to post that or like this. I'll talk to y'all tomorrow for Sin Day. No idea what I'm talking about yet, but I'll figure it out. Bye. Are you satisfied with yourself? Dory, you're a menace. You're a menace. Yeah, I'm talking about you. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about you.